The federal courthouse in downtown Denver had never seen a morning like this. Rain streaked the marble steps as employees hurried inside, clutching coffee cups and briefcases, unaware that within the hour their lives would be measured in seconds. Inside the East Wing infirmary, Nurse Sarah Kellan adjusted her stethoscope and reviewed a chart, her expression calm, her movements economical. To anyone watching, she was simply another overworked medical professional assigned to the courthouse clinic, there to handle fainting jurors and the occasional panic attack from nervous witnesses. No one knew that 6 years earlier, Sarah Kellan had gone by a different name in classified briefing rooms, Callsign Wraith, one of the few women to complete combat applications group selection, a ghost who had walked out of 3 war zones without a scratch on record because officially, she had never been there. At 9:42 a.m., the doors of courtroom 4B burst open. For masked men in tactical gear stormed the corridor, zip-tying security guards before they could reach their weapons. The lead gunman, a broad-shouldered man who called himself Reaper, pressed a pistol to the back of Judge Elaine Whitfield's skull and marched her toward the lobby, using her as a shield while his men swept the building for hostages. Screaming erupted. Bailiffs dropped their weapons on command. Within 90 seconds, the entire courthouse was locked under armed control, and the gunmen began herding terrified staff into the main atrium, where marble floors and vaulted ceilings turned every sound into an echo of dread. Sarah heard the first shot from 2 floors up. She didn't freeze. She didn't reach for her phone. Instead, her training took over with a stillness that felt almost peaceful, heart rate steady, breathing controlled, mind already mapping exits, head counts, and threat positions from years of muscle memory she tried to bury under hospital corners and patient charts. She slipped off her white coat, tucked her ID badge into her sock, and moved toward the stairwell not to escape, but to get closer. Downtown, the response was chaos. Local police cordoned the block, but SWAT command estimated a 15-minute window before they could stage an entry. A window the gunmen didn't intend to give them. Reaper's crew wasn't after money. They were after Judge Whitfield, the presiding judge in a federal case against an arms trafficking network with connections stretching from Eastern Europe to cartels in the South. If she reached trial, testimony locked away in her chambers would expose a supply chain worth hundreds of millions. Reaper had one job: extract her, or silence her permanently before the doors opened again. Sarah reached the atrium's upper mezzanine unnoticed, crouched behind a marble balustrade, watching the gunmen fan out below. She counted 4 visible, likely a 5th covering the parking exit. Judge Whitfield was on her knees now, a gun pressed to her temple, her hands shaking as she begged for her life in front of 30 hostages forced to sit cross-legged on the cold floor. A young clerk sobbed uncontrollably. A security guard bled from a graze wound on his shoulder, ignored, left to seep through his uniform. For a moment, Sarah's mind flickered back to a rooftop in Kandahar, to the sound of a radio crackling danger close, to the version of herself she thought she'd left behind when she signed her hospital contract and told herself the killing was over. She had promised her sister, the only family she had left, that she was done, that she would heal people now, not extract them from burning buildings. But watching Judge Whitfield's trembling hands, watching a 9-year-old girl, the daughter of a court reporter, cowering behind her mother's legs, Sarah understood with brutal clarity that promises meant nothing to men with guns in a room full of civilians. She reached for the small fire alarm control panel bolted to the mezzanine wall, disabled the sprinkler override with 3 practice motions, and triggered a partial system fault, enough to kill half the lobby lighting and confuse the men below without triggering a full evacuation siren that would panic them into executing hostages. In the sudden dimness, chaos rippled through the gunmen's ranks. One shouted for a status check. Reaper barked at his men to hold position, his grip tightening on the judge's collar. Sarah moved. She dropped silently from the mezzanine onto a support beam, then to the floor behind a decorative pillar, closing distance on the nearest gunman before he registered movement. Her hand found his wrist, redirected his weapon skyward, and in one fluid motion that looked more like a dance than a fight, she disarmed him and dropped him unconscious with a strike to the base of his skull. Barely a whisper of sound in the tiled hall. She dragged his body behind the pillar, took his sidearm and checked the mag. 12 rounds. A second gunman turned at the wrong moment, catching a shadow where there shouldn't have been one. Sarah didn't hesitate. Years of training didn't allow room for it. Within 4 seconds, he was down 2, disarmed and zip-tied with his own restraints, his rifle now slung across her back. 2 down. 2 to go, plus Reaper, who still had the judge. Somewhere in the atrium, a hostage gasped audibly at what they just witnessed. A nurse, their nurse, moving like something out of a special forces training film. Word rippled through the terrified crowd in whispers. She's not just a nurse. Reaper's head snapped toward the noise, sensing something had shifted in the room. But he couldn't yet see what, or who, was hunting him now. Sarah pressed her back against a cold marble column, breathing steady, eyes locked on the man holding a judge's life in his hands. The real fight hadn't even started yet. If you want to see how far Sarah is willing to go to save the judge and everyone trapped in that courthouse, make sure you're subscribed, because Chapter 2 is where her true identity comes fully into the light, and it changes everything. Reaper's third man rounded the corner of the mezzanine stairwell just as Sarah eliminated the fourth, and for the first time, chaos turned into recognition. He saw his unconscious partner slumped against the pillar, saw the woman in scrubs holding a rifle like she'd been born with one in her hands, and he shouted a warning that cracked through the atrium like a gunshot. Reaper spun, dragging Judge Whitfield with him, using her body as a shield while his last remaining man opened fire toward the mezzanine, spraying rounds that shattered glass display cases and sent hostages screaming flat against the marble floor. Sarah dove behind a stone bench, rounds chipping the granite inches from her head. She returned 2 controlled shots, catching the shooter in the shoulder and thigh, dropping him instantly. The atrium fell into a terrible silence, broken only by Judge Whitfield's ragged breathing and Reaper's voice, low and venomous, echoing across the hall. "Whoever you are," he called out, "you've got 5 seconds before I paint this floor with a federal judge's blood." Sarah stood slowly from behind the bench, weapon lowered but ready, scrubs stained with dust and someone else's blood. She'd taken off her badge, but there was no hiding what she was anymore, not after what the hostages had seen. "You don't want to do that," she said, voice level, almost gentle. The same voice she used on frightened patients in the ICU. "Because then you'd have nothing left to bargain with. And bargaining is the only reason you're still breathing right now." Reaper's eyes narrowed, sizing her up properly for the first time. The stance, the grip, the complete absence of fear in a hostage situation that should have paralyzed a civilian. "Who trained you?" he asked, genuine confusion cutting through his aggression. "Someone who taught me that men like you always talk too much before you act," Sarah replied, taking a slow step forward. "You're not federal. You're not local. That accent's Eastern European, filed down by a few years stateside. You're here for evidence, not ransom, which means you already know you can't walk out of this building alive either way. So the only question left is how many more people you drag down with you." Something in her tone rattled him. Not fear, but familiarity. The unshakable calm of someone who had stared down worse men in worse places. Reaper's grip on the judge faltered for half a second, and that half second was all Sarah needed. She fired once, clipping his weapon hand, sending the pistol clattering across the marble floor. Judge Whitfield collapsed forward, scrambling away as Sarah closed the final 15 feet in under 2 seconds, driving Reaper backward into a support column with controlled, brutal efficiency. He fought back, landing a glancing blow to her jaw, but Sarah absorbed it without losing rhythm, countering with a strike to his ribs that folded him at the waist, followed by a knee that put him flat on the marble, gasping. She had him restrained with his own zip ties in under 10 seconds, his earlier bravado replaced by wide-eyed disbelief as police sirens finally screamed toward the building's entrance, red and blue lights strobing through the tall courthouse windows. SWAT breached the doors 90 seconds later to find 4 masked gunmen already restrained, a wounded security guard receiving pressure bandage first aid, and Judge Whitfield alive, shaking but unharmed, seated safely against the far wall. And beside her, calmly checking the guard's pulse as though the last 10 minutes hadn't happened, was a nurse in blood-stained scrubs that the responding officers almost walked straight past, until the incident commander's radio crackled with a name from a classified database flag that made his blood run cold. "Confirm ID," the voice on the radio said. "We've got a match. Callsign Wraith. Repeat, Wraith is on scene." The commander's eyes lifted slowly from his radio to the woman crouched beside the wounded guard, and for the first time, he understood he wasn't looking at a hero who happened to be in the right place. He was looking at a ghost the U.S. government had once considered one of its most valuable and most dangerous assets. A woman whose file had been sealed under classifications most generals never saw, now kneeling in a hospital scrub top, calmly instructing a paramedic on how to stabilize a gunshot wound. Sarah didn't look up. She didn't need to. She already knew what came next. The questions, the debriefings, the inevitable calls from people who thought she'd disappeared for good. But for now, none of that mattered. What mattered was Judge Whitfield, alive and safe enough to testify. What mattered was 30 hostages walking out through those courthouse doors instead of being carried out. 6 years of trying to be ordinary had just been undone in 11 minutes. And as the courthouse filled with flashing lights and grateful, stunned faces, one young clerk approached her hesitantly, voice trembling. "You saved us," she whispered. "Who are you?" Sarah finally looked up, a faint, tired smile crossing her face. "Just a nurse," she said quietly. "Just doing my job." But everyone in that atrium knew better now. And somewhere above them, a senior military liaison stepped through the shattered doors, removed his cap, and offered Sarah Kellan a salute so precise, so deliberate, that every officer in the room fell silent, understanding they had just witnessed something far bigger than a hostage rescue. They had witnessed a legend step out of the shadows, if only for one unforgettable morning.